kind of advice do you have to homeowners?
Practicing that preparedness. Starting the conversation now is always going to be a benefit to any association out there.
And welcome to the Recovery Report Live, GlobalPro's deep dive into relevant insurance topics, providing actionable takeaways and valuable insights. We aim to update, educate, and inform you weekly. I'm Daniel Odess, president of GlobalPro, where we manage risk to recovery. For more than a decade, we have represented thousands of business owners and community associations alike in the placement of insurance and the recovery from more than $1 billion worth of loss. We are your source for insurance news you can use. I'm very excited today to have one of my colleagues join us here today. Mr. Craig Applebaum, our Senior Vice President of GlobalPro, will be joining our broadcast to answer some questions about things that are going on in our industry and ways in which he can help you as a policyholder recover from your loss and damage as we navigate these very difficult and tough times. Hey, Craig, you there with us today?
Yes, I am.
All right, there we go. Still excited to have you on. So glad you could navigate the computer there a little bit and join our broadcast. Craig brings with us an enormous amount of experience. Before joining us, he spent time on the front lines representing claimants and many different types of lawsuits, complex business. And in 2016, Craig joined us as our general counsel and started to assist policyholders in recovering from loss. In his capacity as senior vice president, he leads our claims teams and also is our inside general counsel, helping us sort through some general matters from day to day, and whether it's our IP work or dealing with, whether it's landlord issues, because we do own and operate real estate. That's one thing that's unique about GlobalPro. We understand what it's like to be a business owner, be out there working through insurance, working with tenants and as a landlord. And Craig has, while spending his days in the front lines, is engaging a lot of community associations and business owners day to day. Obviously, in the wake of this pandemic and the unfortunate situation we see here unraveling in the news with the riots, we are fielding an enormous amount of inquiries, and what's great about Craig and his experience is that, and I say this all the time about our staff, we're just not just licensed adjusters. We are always licensed in something else. And Craig is that. He is a licensed attorney serving the interest of policyholders at the beginning stages of it. The first 72 hours of any claim are so important to the outcome of a loss, and that couldn't be more true now today in dealing with these back-to-back claims, a topic we're going to get into a little bit later in the broadcast. But I want to welcome Craig to the show. How are things doing in the Miami Beach area there for you, Craig?
Pretty good, Dan. Pretty good.
Yeah.
Things are going well, and continuing to represent the policyholders from Miami Beach in the satellite offices, if you will. But yeah, things are going great. How are you today?
I'm doing well. One of the issues I want to jump right into, because it's something that, obviously in the wake of this pandemic, we're seeing quite a bit of, and a topic that you and I spend a lot of time talking about, is when we get in these claims where these insurance companies have tried to enforce certain policy terms to deny losses, and there's been, and just in the past several months, we have had some big wins here at GlobalPro. And a lot of those have to do with situations where we saw denial. And one of the examples you brought up earlier today when we were preparing for today's broadcast was this issue of surface water, and I certainly think it's a relevant one. We're seeing quite a bit of claims come in from community associations, specifically where they have these elevated pool decks and denials. What are you seeing as far as the claims are concerned and the response we're getting from insurers to date?
So on that particular issue, what we're seeing is a high percentage of erroneous denials. And it is something that is really surprising for not only us, but the policyholders we represent. Because when you read the policy and you see that something like groundwater, you would think that, okay, that's water on the ground. Being used to deny your claim that happens on the third floor of your building or the sixth floor of your building, And it's very hard to understand. And in most circumstances, it is these sorts of denials that are driving the increases in litigation that insurers are so often complaining about, seeing huge increases in litigation. But you're also seeing huge increases, at least from my side of things, in erroneous decisions, such as these. And so obviously what's a little bit different here is that instead of going and filing one of those lawsuits, we've done the research, we've supplied the insurance companies with that legal research, and more times than not, they come to their senses and understanding that they made a mistake, and we are able to achieve a successful resolution on those claims. We've done a good number of those in the first 2 quarters of this year, and we actually have a few more that as recently as last week, we had a conference call with a major insurer on a multi-million-dollar claim to resolve this issue concerning surface/groundwater and the fact that they used that exclusion on an area of the property that's located some 150 feet in the air.
And, that's not a flood, right?
And it's not a flood. It's not a Noah's Ark situation, as I like to say.
Yeah, and I've over the years I've seen many denials for floods, and then I come to learn that it's 4th floor pool deck or 7th floor, and as you mentioned, many feet above ground. And even when I'll never forget, we had a claim on Miami Beach where an association had a large chiller pipe that went through a planter, and they actually had a button in their elevator for ground floor. And they tried to deny that claim for pipes that were below ground, which was interesting because it went through a planter. Certainly not the intention of the policy, and certainly something we prevailed on and got paid. But we have a long history of that stuff, and which kind of rolls into this issue of faulty workmanship is another thing, a real hot topic that we're seeing a lot of. One of the trends that I saw coming out of the last downturn and the recession we had, following the mortgage issues of late 2008 through 2010, as we got back to business, I used to call them the boom buildings. I always hunted around for them because I knew that plenty of them had faulty workmanship issue because budgets were tight. Money wasn't flowing quite well, and most of your developers and builders are running to the end and will do anything to close out a building and turn it over to get that final payment and to wipe their hands of the issues that they surely anticipate. And something we pioneered here at GlobalPro was to look at why those issues could not be recoverable under a first-party insurer, and why do we need to invest so much money into litigation and suing our contractors and developers, and why can't we take that burden and put it on someone else's shoulders? And we talked a little bit about this recently with regards to a claim that we had downtown. Neighboring property was under construction, and the association was thinking about, do we go GlobalPro? Do we go litigation route? Talk to us a little bit about those coverage issues and where you're seeing some of the difficulties for some of these associations as we roll out of the pandemic into the riots. But we're going to get on the other side of this. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. What should our association clientele anticipate and look for?
Sure. So to address the faulty workmanship concern and what we're seeing with today's coverage issues and how it's affecting today's coverage issues is that insurers use faulty workmanship to exclude coverage for things that your contractors or your developers are doing. Now, most policies allow for resulting damage. The resulting damage, depending on the policy, though, may need a covered causal loss. It may not just be the resulting damage that's necessary to pick up. And similarly to those denials that we're seeing on the ground surface water, we're seeing these denials for faulty workmanship not being done properly because, as I stated, the policies do owe for resulting damage, and the law is very clear about that. One of the hurdles that we need to overcome in dealing with these insurers on claims is that insurers are in multiple states, multiple countries, and have a lot of different laws they need to follow. Here in Florida, while GlobalPro is in many states, it's important that we know the laws of each of the states, and we do. And so here, for example, in Florida, we use something called the concurrent cause doctrine, which is something that I have time and time again had to educate insurers on in terms of why it is necessary that they pay. And I've been continuing to provide them the case law to show them that the faulty workmanship exclusion may apply, but there is always language in the policy that allows for the resulting damage. So as for instance, if faulty workmanship resulted in water then leaking and a water loss damaging the property, then the insurer is going to be on the hook for paying the damages due to the water, either because that's resulting damage, or water in most policies is a covered cause of loss.
So that's lawyer speak for basically we have an issue with the building, water gets into the property, and that water should be covered, correct?
Correct.
All right. So and there's technically it's this concurrent causation doctrine that we're seeing here in Florida, hold, and there's a couple cases that I know we have discussed in detail. One of which we are an integral part of the success of. And I think that's really important for a lot of these associations that are going through a 558 lawsuit. Don't confuse a 558 lawsuit with what we can do for you as an insurance claim. And I think that's what a lot of associations think, that they need to pursue a 558 claim. And I find that the legal community has confused the idea of making a claim with actually filing a lawsuit. The idea of a 558, which is a Florida statute, by the way, is more related to actually bringing an action or a lawsuit against someone than it is trying to actually adjust a claim. But ultimately, Craig, who's defending and paying these claims?
The insurers.
So it makes more sense than ever to at least attempt to adjust the claim, and if necessary, bring action. And what we always try to explain, and Craig and I have sat in many meetings with community associations, is that there is an alternative to costly litigation. And when it comes to these faulty workmanship issues and defects at your property, if you've had something turn over, or maybe it's just a roof project or a new mechanical or stucco or paint project, we have helped. Just people recover millions upon millions of dollars for these damages. And in some cases, there was a pending lawsuit, and the association decided to dismiss that lawsuit after engaging us. Only after, though, they've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees. So there is an alternative, and that's the important part here. And the important takeaway is that you don't have to pursue a 558 lawsuit at the onset or the discovery of these issues. We can help you. We do this on a contingency fee basis. We engage the experts that are necessary in order to do it, and we prove your entitlements to recoveries, and it works. And that's the reality of it, is that we have a proven method. We have the testimonials. We have the references. We can prove our results. And your attorneys can only talk about how much money it cost them to get there, more so than an actual proven result where our clients don't even go out of pocket for our fees. So and that brings up and kind of like walks right into the next topic we want to hit here, which is construction from neighboring buildings, right? We're seeing a pandemic of sorts. And I think this really started for GlobalPro at the same time that we discovered the ability for us to handle these defect or faulty workmanship losses. Walk us through this process, Craig. Like, what does it mean to be damaged by a neighboring project, and what can GlobalPro do for our clients, which are not only community association but also businesses that may be in ground floor retail spaces or office buildings next door?
For sure. And this is certainly one of the hot trends, if you will, in insurance, is having to deal with the damages caused by neighboring properties during construction. And I think you see that much more in Miami than in most areas as we continue to develop. I believe the Real Deal came out with an article saying that there were 20 or 30 new projects breaking ground in 2020, which is a tremendous amount. Which, those are not isolated projects. They are surrounded by other buildings.
Pretty landlocked here in South Florida, right?
Yeah. Exactly. So, and what happens there is generally what you used to see for an insurance claim side is you had these claims due to the vibrations, due to the construction next door, the pile driving, causing cracks in the facade or in lobby floors. And while you still see that, what we're seeing now more and more over the last few years is this overspray from adjacent buildings onto association property, which is a tremendous burden on the association in terms of having to restore its property after that kind of a loss. It does not entail simply just removing the concrete stucco, because what happens is the total damage in order to restore the property to pre-loss condition. I mean, you're not talking about just a little job to spot paint, because if you spot paint on one facade, it's going to look horrible. I mean, and what happens is you get a sort of a checkerboard look of your building, which nobody wants.
Not restoring the property to pre-loss condition for sure.
Right. And so what you're going to have to do is the whole facade in order to get it back to pre-loss condition, which is a multi-million-dollar project. And depending on where the property is located, staging alone can be a tremendous burden on the association. So it's very important for the associations to not only protect themselves, but protect their rights, because a trap that associations tend to fall into is settling something like a good neighbor agreement, which is when the adjacent property doing construction comes over and says, hey, listen, for some small sum, it can be $100,000, $200,000, that we will, please allow us to do our construction, allow us the chance to fix your building, and in exchange for that, we'll give you, as a good neighbor, a few $100,000. And some of these associations take that thinking that that's a great deal because they get money now, but the reality is the damages that are being caused are in the millions. And we saw that, I've seen that on several claims actually, where they get these offers in the six figures, and we're settling the claims when we do it with insurance company in the sevens, right? So they're out of touch. And if associations take those good neighbor agreements, while they may have gotten a few $100,000 now, they're going to be out of pocket a few million in the expenses it's going to take to restore the property. And we're not just talking about paint or stucco, but you're talking about balcony railings, sliding glass doors. And those, all the numbers add up very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I like to, I want to rebrand the idea of a good neighbor agreement and call it a license to damage. It certainly is. It gives them the idea that, oh, don't worry about that. We got an agreement here. We'll fix it later. And a lot of the associations don't consider the increased cost of the maintenance that may be associated with it, or the long-term damage it may be causing the building that might be not foreseen immediately. For instance, we had one association in the Brickell area that considered such an agreement, and thankfully they did not enter into the agreement. And there was a lot of concrete ended up on their cooling tower systems, which had they not engaged GlobalPro, who ultimately engaged a number of experts, including engineers, spent hundreds of thousands of dollars of our own cash on behalf of the association. Association didn't pay $1 out of pocket, found the damage, included that amount of that damage in its claim against that contractor, and actually settled that claim for 8 figures. And into contrast, we heard of another building in the Edgewater area that decided not to engage our services. They before we became aware of the situation, they had already engaged another adjusting firm who had no experience in dealing with this type of situation. Wrote up an enormous and an erroneous estimate, quickly pushed the thing into litigation. By the time it was in litigation, we had already been retained by this association in Brickell and settled a claim for more than $10 million for almost identical damages caused by a neighboring project. Knowing who you're retaining and knowing who you're engaging is obviously very important to the outcome and success of any sort of claim. So we encourage you to obviously do your background. That's why I mentioned earlier in our discussion here with Craig about we have the references, we have the testimonials. I mean, make sure that, if you are researching and you do need assistance, you're looking at the credibility of those that you're engaging, because in order to do these claims right, you need the right people in the right seats to make them happen. And I think that we're seeing a lot of this construction that's going on nearby, or we like to say off-site, that's substantially damaged these projects or these existing buildings. Is just not getting properly addressed, and it's taking longer. It's costing associations tremendous amount of money. They're missing enormous scopes of work. And then recently, Craig, I was actually told that an association that was considering pursuing a claim against them was afraid that if they had to make a claim on their own insurance, the rates would actually go up. What are your thoughts on that situation?
My thoughts on that situation are that seems kind of contrary to what we've seen. I think there are actually examples where after claims are filed, the rates go down. In my opinion, it has a one-off like that does nothing to calculate the risk. So a building will only go up one time next to you. It's not something that the insurer can calculate a risk on and therefore then charge you additional premiums, which is supposed to be the basis for the premiums is calculated by how much risk the insurer is taking. So that building goes up one time, it's not going up again. So I think it seems to me like a little misinformation, or if that is happening, some major wrongdoing on the insurer's side.
It's not as if they're going to be building another building there. So the fact of the matter is that once I've recovered those damages, and what I'm trying to, just taking a step back, what I'm trying to get at here, the point is that, and something we started talking about, but we didn't name it, is third-party claims, making claims against other parties' insurance. And we do this every day with a tremendous amount of success, and it costs our clients nothing out of pocket. Law firms charge you upfront retainers, hourlies. Maybe they do it on a hybrid at best. But the reality of it is that they're not there to adjust a claim. They're there to litigate. So what's incentivizing them to try to get this thing done when ultimately, and as Craig mentioned before, the people that are defending and ultimately paying these claims are insurance companies anyways. If you make a third-party claim, which is a claim on someone else's insurance, their general liability insurer. And that's what we can do here on these types of claims where you have construction damage to your property from a neighboring project, is that you can make a claim against their insurance, and we can represent your interest in that claim without the need for litigation, and we do it routinely. Now, ultimately, it may be decided that we want to pursue the claim on your own insurance, but that will be something that we do with you, and we obviously work with you to understand why that may be in your best interest. And one of those things is attorney's fees, right?
Yep.
So, and ultimately, if you have to make a claim on your own insurance and you have to do your recovery, guess what your insurance company does after it pays you? It sues the neighboring contractor to recover through what's an action called subrogation. And then they recover that money back. So to Craig's point about rates and how they measure risk in and the cost of your premium, if they're able to pay you, it's that loss is never going to happen again, and they have the opportunity to recover that money back, then why are you seeing substantial rate increases, allegedly, from making said claim against your own insurance for those damages? It really doesn't compute for me, and I think it's a lot of misinformation out there. Quite frankly, where we see a lot of rate increases occur is at the legislative level. It's not because one community association or business owner made a claim. It's because there's changes in markets that they believe dictate and necessitate the increase. It's not because one person or one association or business is making a claim, and it's more has to do with what's going on in our economy as globally, or not. Maybe there's a disaster that's affecting all of us, like a pandemic, but certainly not a one-off claim for a neighboring construction project. Well, with that, Craig, I really want to thank you for joining us here today. I know you got a calendar full of meetings and additional webinars that you need to attend to. We really appreciate your time. I appreciate you always. And we hope to have you on in the future, as we plan to continue to provide our clients and our attendees that are tuning in today actionable information that they can use in every day as it relates to whether it's obtaining new insurance or recovering from loss. So again, Craig, thanks for joining us here today.
Thanks so much for having me on. It was great, and looking forward to coming back.
All right, take care, Craig. Enjoy this beautiful weather. All right, and with that, we're going to roll into the rest of the show here today. First off, I want to hit up an update. We obviously have Cristobal out there, and it's headed towards the coastline of the Gulf Coast. But one thing important to keep in mind regarding the hurricanes, and kind of grateful that Cristobal came onto the scene early here, because I think Cristobal is a reminder that these storms are massive. And while the eye of the storm is something that we track to indicate direction and where it's going to go, it's very, very important for our listeners to keep in mind that the storms are large and cover miles and miles of area, because what they're reporting right now from NOAA, which is one of your best sources of information as it relates to the trajectory and the direction that any storm is going to head into, because it's credible, is that they're expecting tremendous amount of rain all over the coastline of Florida and many miles inward, which is really far from the center of that storm. One projection is 7 to 10 inches in the Panhandle. And and I know that the news cycle has moved on many moons ago from Hurricane Michael, but I can tell you right now, because we were boots on the ground there immediately after the storm, helping many clients recover from those loss and damages. We donated to churches, we helped with local community efforts, and we saw how badly that community was impacted. They are literally just in the beginnings of recovery. And to see this amount of rain threatening that area could spell a tremendous amount of damage there. So you'll hear me say this over and over again in every broadcast that we have here at the Recovery Report Live, but practice preparedness, be ready. Even if the center of the storm goes through the Louisiana area or Texas, they're expecting it to impact us here in Florida. And we will feel that weather pattern, either good or bad, here in South Florida. Either it'll pull weather towards it and away from us, or it'll push weather events down towards the southern areas and Central Florida area, impacting those markets. So definitely don't dismiss it just because it may be going to other parts of the Gulf area. The reality of it is that the Gulf it has its own weather patterns. When storms move into those areas, you never know really where they're going to go. Look at Katrina, look at Irma, look at Harvey. I mean, if you look back at historical projections where those storms are supposed to go, they couldn't have been more wrong. So follow that stuff, understand it, and make sure that you are prepared to do what it is required of you to make sure that you're protecting your business, your community association, preparing it for Cristobal or whatever's to come after that. Again, this is a historical year already with disaster. It's a historical year for hurricanes. We continue to set records. We continue to be impacted by so many different important issues, and things that is a constant reminder for all of us to stay vigilant, practice preparedness. Some of the insurance trends that are going on right now, and something I want to touch on and kind of go back and remind people, we are still in the midst of a pandemic. In fact, I believe reading yesterday was, the single largest increase in reported infections, and whether that data is because there's more testing going on or because there's actually more people being infected. I'm not the judge of that, nor am I the scientist, and hence why I direct people to refer to NOAA as it relates to the directions and which way those things are going. Same is said for the reporting on infections, but as it relates to insurance and the topics that are important here and why you all are tuning in to listen to our broadcast, there's an argument that is playing out, and certainly we saw a recent article finally give the attention it is deserving. This idea of physical loss. A lot of people associate physical loss with the things that we're seeing from the looting and the riots, right? A broken window, fire damage, graffiti, things like that. Physical loss in some jurisdictions also includes the inability of your employees to actually access your place of business. The supplies can no longer be delivered. Your employees your clientele no longer can safely be inside your place of business. Your place of business can no longer be used as intended. Those things are physical. You physically cannot have employees in your place of business. You can physically, your clientele can physically not dine in your restaurant, or now only 50% of them can. They physically cannot be there. There's this idea of that being a tangible loss. So it's as a reminder, these things are these issues are still unfolding. And as the media and the news cycle and society moves on to the next disaster, as we head into the end of the fourth month since the beginnings of the pandemic, don't lose sight of the issues that we have already played out, and obviously stay vigilant, as I've mentioned, but stay up to date and tune in, and we'll continue to update you on these important issues, because when the news cycle moves on, and as it already has started to do it, there's going to be less reporting on these issues, but we're going to continue talking about them, because there is thousands of businesses that suffer tremendous amount of loss, and many of them have already received denials, largely wrong. Many of them have received enormous requests for information, some of which they will never be able to comply with, because it either doesn't exist, or it costs money to obtain that information, and it's just further burdensome on a business that's already reeling from loss, and the insurance company's offering no olive branch or assistance in that regard. And so we encourage you, though, as policyholders, to always remember to promptly report your loss, mitigate your damage, and then rebuild. And that holds true still with claims from the pandemic. We still believe that if you're going to go back to business, that you should mitigate, because until you've mitigated or cleaned your place of business, whether that's a community association or your business, you have not restored your property to a pre-loss condition. So we want to make sure that our clientele, our listeners, and our businesses are going out there obtaining proposals to actually mitigate, so that they can rebuild and get back to business as part of their claims process. We want to make sure that in the wave of the destruction of our communities caused by the riots and the economic losses caused by the curfews and civil authority enacted by our local authorities, that this may actually lead to a complicated claims process. So making sure that you have promptly reported the claim, making sure that you've mitigated and cleaned up, and then started the rebuilding process is important if you are damaged by any of this civil unrest and the communities responding to a very important issue. But in focusing on the insurance issues and recoverable losses, it's important that you have documented your damage as it relates to a pandemic as we move into, or if you have suffered damages from a riot and you start to report that claim, that you can differentiate between the period of restoration from the pandemic and that of the riots. And if they do overlap, it's important that you engage professionals to help you walk you through that complicated analysis. Because that brings me to the educational portion of our broadcast here, and talking about the claims process and looking back at historical times and when we did see one back-to-back significant loss situations that impacted major areas. And one that comes to mind, 2005, we had Katrina, then we had Wilma impact the South Florida region. And obviously we all know that Katrina headed over to Louisiana and caused a tremendous amount of damage. And that's an unforgettable event, and tremendous amount of loss of life and flooding and a lot of controversial issues that occurred thereafter. And then you had Wilma come through the South Florida area shortly thereafter. The storms kind of took a different path. You had Katrina go largely from east to west, and then you had Wilma going from west to east, which one was a tremendous flooding event. The other one was a very wind event for the South Florida area. But what's important about that is that they were back to back, right? And when you have these back-to-back situations, distinguishing between what you're claiming for one versus the other can be very, very important. And that brings up three very important points I want to make. The first one is being able to illustrate why there's important to immediately document your damages. Illustration of your damages, or document your damages, which is point number one, document your damages. As to what your damages were immediately after any one of the claims is very important. So if there was water on the floor following the riot, making sure that you take pictures of or vandalism, make sure you take pictures of the water damage on the floor immediately after that, so you capture that damage in its moment and in its condition as you first found it. Okay, it's very important that you do that. So point number one, document your damages. Point number two, and something I've already spoken about, is promptly report the loss, but do it accurately. Okay, so point number one, document your damages. Point number two, promptly report your loss. Do it accurately, though. Don't make assumptions as to what your extent to your damages are. You only know what you can see, and the reality of it is that when you're reporting your claim, it is okay to say, as of right now, this is what I know to be true. Okay? Remember that. As of right now, this is what I know to be true, and then follow that with what you know to be true, and give an accurate reporting of those damages and loss. The fact is that as you start to rebuild, once you've recovered the money you're entitled to, you may find additional damages. So it's important that you have qualified your statements as of now, this is what I know. And as you do find additional information out or about your damages, it's okay to update the insurance company. We do that routinely for our clients here at GlobalPro. So I encourage you to do that. The third point and our final point here is pay close attention to policy terms like the period of restoration. Another point that I touched on just a bit earlier. And again, period of restoration is a time that you suffer the loss to when you reasonably could have gotten back the business. Now, I'm generalizing the term, but in the condition and that will appear in your business owner policy. So it's important that you look at your business owner policy and see how it's specifically defined and how it may help or hurt your claim for damages and its recovery. Things like extra expense, getting back to business, training of employees, buying additional equipment or buying other equipment to offset your income losses in order to mitigate those losses. Things like that. You got to pay close attention to policy terms, understand what they are. Our entire staff is always available to you 24/7, 365 days of the year to provide you insight into what policy terms and conditions may help or hurt your claim. We obviously are here to help you review those things and to help you get back to business, because we know that it takes an entire community effort to rebound from loss and damage. And we, again, an event that I most recently touched on was Hurricane Michael. We saw a tremendous community effort. I would say it was more on the private side than on the public. Churches and people and community centers and organizations from all over the country got together, raised money, provided supplies and materials, manpower, everything. It really takes a community to rebound from this thing. And that's what's really, really important, and really brings me to my closing remarks and our last section of our broadcast that we give on a weekly basis every Thursday at the same time, 11 o'clock. Please tune in. And community is at the cornerstone of GlobalPro and our culture here. And I wanted to read today our statement that we put out. And if you follow us on social media, or if you don't, I encourage you to do it so that you get up-to-date information. And you will see our statement there. We put it there. And GlobalPro issued this statement. GlobalPro will always stand with our community in difficult times. And today is no different. And I truly, truly believe that. And it's in my heart as the leader of our company, founded in 2012 with a focus on community. You'll see it throughout all of our marketing materials, all over our website. That's not something we decided to do today. That's something we've always done. So today is no different. We stand with the Black community and our commitment to doing the work to update, inform, educate ourselves and our community on the impacts of racism and injustice that affects all of us. Leadership, specifically in the community, will guide us beyond this difficult times and towards recovery. Together, we will overcome. And this really, really piggybacks on pretty much everything I've said today throughout this entire broadcast, how important it is for us as leaders to guide our community to recovery. And we can only do that as a total community and working together to do that and to overcome all of this injustice and racism and everything else that plagues our society constantly and that we see play out not only on the media but locally and behind the scenes when the cameras aren't rolling. So we need to do what we can, be vigilant, We need to practice preparedness as not only policyholders, but business owners, community associations. We need to do what we can to protect our local communities on a micro basis, as well as our country on a macro basis, to work together to overcome. I encourage everyone to go online, check out our resource section, our website, for all kinds of interactive information, to view, download this information to help you be prepared for your next renewal or recover from a loss. GetGlobalPro.com/resources. On our website, you'll find all kinds of latest information, whether it's interesting articles to other broadcasts and recordings with our clients and other pillars in our community that can provide you insight you can use to help you plan for the next disaster and recover expediently from those issues and avoid the pitfalls of most of your insurance policies and contracts. We want to highlight, obviously, last week's webinar. Make sure that you can access those on our YouTube channel. We're pulling snippets from it and putting it all over our social media. So again, check us out. So a huge thank you to all of our attendees. We really appreciate you tuning in this week. Feel free to connect with us anytime, anywhere, 24/7, 365 days a year. We're available 855-487-7475 or on our social media pages at our website. We're on Facebook, LinkedIn, you name it, Twitter, YouTube. We're out there. We want to give you the information you can use as a policyholder. Again, thank you for tuning in this week. It was an absolute pleasure to have Craig on, and we can't wait for next week. We got an incredible packed schedule for the next couple of weeks with all kinds of interesting pillars of our community, experts on many different issues that we know are going to be relevant to you as business owners and community association. So again, thank you for tuning in today.